I'm Welton Gaddy. Welcome to State of Belief, continuing coverage of the 2020 Republican National Convention. The sad truth is, there are smart people who fear an all-out civil war in this country after the November election. Now, maybe we won't need to wait even that long. Tuesday night in Kenosha, Wisconsin, armed lily-white militias claiming to protect private property and preserve law and order as an American city is yet again convulsed by an act of police violence, an act captured on video. Uniformed police shooting an unarmed black man, Jacob Blake, 7 times in the back while his 3 small sons looked on. An act addressed at the first night of the Republican National Convention by Vice President Mike Pence with the words, "We will always stand with the men and women who serve on the thin blue line of law enforcement. We're going to back the blue." Well, you know who else is backing the blue in Kenosha? A group of young white men calling themselves the Boogaloo Boys, and one of whom is 17 and drove from Illinois with an AR-15 and apparently appointed himself to guard a gas station and shoot and kill at least 2 protesters. Stopping gun violence is the work and ministry of Pastor Mike McBride, director of the Live Free campaign, who has been with us many, many times. But this is a whole new low in our collective decline. Pastor Mike, I'm always glad to talk with you, but I am so angry as well as sad for what we're talking about right now.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to be joining you again, and I share in your anger. It's a terrible, terrible reality that we are living through right now.
Early reports suggest eyewitnesses seeing police giving the armed guys water and thanking them for being there. This is all so incredibly polarizing in an already polarized moment in our history.
Well, I saw the videos. I actually posted them as they were coming out. They were being sent to me by some comrades in the Wisconsin area. And I think polarizing is not strong enough of a word. It's incendiary. It is an act of complicity, of terror by law enforcement agents, which has a 300-year unbroken lineage towards Black people in this country. And I think the saddest part of this reality is there are still too many non-Black folks who are attempting to explain this away as a one-off. 300 years of Black people at every age of our existence here asking for police to stop brutalizing us. Children, teenagers, adults, and elders for 300 years consistently asking for the same thing is not a one-off. It is the longest running nightmare many Black people are experiencing in this country.
Scrolling through social media, it's astounding how opposite the reactions are. Faith leaders and other calling for justice in the face of such blatant racism. Meanwhile, there are voices praising the shooter and saying protesters had it coming. How will we ever reconcile this kind of dual reality?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. And honestly, I think that that really has to be a question for white Americans to answer. The reality is Black people have been living with the same experience for 300 years. And even white progressives and white moderates continue to act surprised. They don't engage their more conservative family members or political or religious comrades or friends or associates. The burden continues to be on Black people to try and explain 300 years of the exact same terror that we've experienced. I do believe that if individuals want peace to reign in the country, we have to have a reimagined reality and approach to the way in which we address issues of violence and crime and poverty and conflict. Dr. King said it best. This country is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. Dr. King said that in 1968 before he was assassinated by a white American person who may have had some ties to the police department. I mean, he is arguably the most peaceful American icon in the history of this country, and his life was literally taken by the very actions people are asking Black people to take. This is a question for white Americans, and I think more importantly, since we are a faith-based program, it's a question for white people of faith. 59% of white Americans are still leaning towards voting for a white supremacist in the White House. 80-something% of white evangelicals are still thinking of voting for this president. This is not a problem for Black America to solve. It's a problem for white America to take up their cross daily and figure this out.
You're exactly right. Pastor Mike, in the face of all of this violence and hatred and denial, I was moved by the words of a local pastor whose church nearly avoided being lost to fire. He said, "We'd rather lose 100 church buildings than one more human life." Why does it seem that this kind of perspective is just impossible for so many people to grasp?
Well, I think the ideology of this country has always been property over people, buildings over bodies. We live in a society that has always prioritized the production of materials and capital. And unfortunately, our theological traditions have all helped to make sense of such a misinformed way of seeing the world. Thankfully, there's always a remnant of people of faith and goodwill, people of no faith, who have, figured out a way to clarify what our priorities should look like. And so to the UUs there in Kenosha, who had their church, set on fire. I too had my church set on fire several weeks ago after hanging a Black Lives Matter banner. I'm glad no one was hurt. And I continue to assert that we must prioritize the saving of lives at every turn. You can rebuild buildings. You cannot rebuild a broken and taken life. And so I hope that we continue as people of faith to promulgate this. It is not to suggest that we don't mourn the loss of livelihood and the loss of a person's kind of life, work, or passion. But this is where the society, I believe, has to take greater responsibility for redressing these realities. We are going to pay for the injustice of police violence on the front end or on the back end. Lawsuits, civil unrest, all of this costs every citizen of this country resources. Why not just invest on the front end to do things that we know shift the kind of realities that make this kind of uprising happen, and certainly radically reimagine law enforcement in this country? It's long past time for us to do it. And I hope more of us think outside of the box and reimagine it. Abolish this system of policing that requires the brutalization of Black bodies, and let's reimagine a public safety system for the 21st century. I hope we as people of faith have a prophetic imagination to do so.
People are angry, justifiably angry. How can we help them channel that anger so that they don't become another angry mob? Or is that just what's called for at this point?
Well, I think that people should ensure their anger is always controlled and their anger is at always channeled towards something that is constructive. So we have an election coming up. We should vote. You should vote your mayor out of office if they refuse to defund the police. You should vote your city council members out of office if they refuse to defund the police. You should vote your prosecutors out of office if they won't hold police officers accountable. You should vote your attorney general at the state level out of office if they won't hire special prosecutors. You should vote your governor out of office if they continue to, resource and fund these kind of terrible law enforcement systems. I mean, we have in 60 days an opportunity to execute in a very powerful way, a very effective response. And that is to literally flip the political leadership in every single city, town, county, state, and federal seat in the country. So that's one way. I think you should stay out in the streets and protest. Show up, let your righteous vote be heard, stay safe, wear masks, wash your hands, social distance as much as you can. Remember that our fight is not against flesh and blood, but it's against spiritualities, principalities, and wickedness in high place. So be clear who you're out there fighting against. Don't fall into despair. Whatever fuels you with hope and joy and love, channel that so we can neutralize and take some of the edge off the righteous anger that we all have. But I do believe anger is a useful emotion. We just can't be overwhelmed by it. We can't be overcome by it. We have to channel it for change. And there are concrete ways to change. Vote, protest, and love one another into life.
Pastor Mike, imagine, if you can, imagine you're speaking to the Republican National Convention, or let's say to both political conventions for that matter. What would you want them to hear from you?
Well, I think I would speak to both the Republicans and the Democrats. The history of anti-Black racism and violence in this country has been a bipartisan affair. No political party has their hands clean. And there is a lack of courage on the Democratic side, and there is a lack of empathy and compassion on the Republican side. I believe that every political leader in this country needs to center the pain of Black folks, Indigenous folks, marginalized people, and begin doing problem solving from the center of people's pain and not from the edges that are incremental in nature. We are people who deserve a quality of life that is not daily trivialized by anti-Black violence and arbitrary violence at the hands of the state. And certainly all those who are people of faith do not use the name of God to try and provide cover for imperialism. God never stands on the side of the empire. And so if you are in love with imperialistic ways, it is likely you are an enemy of God. And we all know that God has never lost a battle. So be careful where you align yourselves. That's what I would say.
Pastor Mike McBride is director of the Live Free campaign for faith in action and a prophetic voice on racial justice and gun violence. What a sad day, but thank you for being here for us, Pastor Mike, and for saying to us what we all need to hear, and saying, I think, about our nation what our nation needs to hear. And friends, look for more of our convention coverage, including interviews with activists and analysts all week at stateofbelief.com. I'm Welton Gaddy. Thanks for watching.